Leading without clear values has a hidden cost. A cost so high, you won't tolerate it anymore as soon as I'll tell you. Over the last 2 months, I've worked closely with leaders specifically on their values. And one thing became obvious. When the values are unclear, decisions stop coming from intention and they start being driven by fear, urgency, and old habits. Once these leaders realized how much time, money, and energy they were losing, they made sure leaving their values for themselves and then integrating them into the business became non-negotiable. And the good news is that it works across different industries, company size, and leadership styles. Here's what I learned so you can also stop wasting your time and your money and then elevate your leadership. First, let me ask you this. Are you consciously aware of your core values and how they're shaping the way you lead today? If this isn't immediately clear, don't worry, you are not alone. But it usually means those values are operating in the background like on autopilot. And that is something I keep seeing in leaders I work with. They're all smart and capable. They care deeply about what they're building. And yet, when things get tense, whether it's a difficult conversation, a strategic choice, people issues, financial pressure, their decisions don't feel as solid as they would like. They doubt, they second themselves. Even though the logic is here, internally, something feels off. It's a sense of, I'm not sure this is the right move or the right direction. Sounds familiar, right? The problem is that in the moments that matter the most, they don't have a clear internal reference point to decide from. This is the part most people misunderstand. Values are not aspirations. You can't just pick your values from a list you found online. Values are what your nervous system relies on when the thinking time disappears because the pressure is on and because your brain now acts on autopilot. And when it does, your brain defaults to that fear, that urgency, approval, the old survival patterns. That's just how humans function. So if your values are unconsciously clear, you always default to those patterns. Then you'll reinforce them through the habits until they become your leadership system. That's why values matter. And they matter most not when things are calm, but the situation gets uncomfortable. And let's be honest, we live those uncomfortable situations many times a day. Let me give you a real example. I worked with a founder who was struggling with his business but couldn't quite put his finger on the why. Through our work on values, he had a very uncomfortable realization. Once his values were clear, he saw that his coworker was consistently working against those values. It was not intentional or malicious, but in ways that drained his energy, created conflicts, and pulled the business in many different directions. It even damaged his reputation. So before doing the work together, he felt stuck and confused. He felt almost guilty for feeling something was wrong. And afterward, the picture became impossible to ignore. So he spent some time looking at the reality, the pros, the cons, the impact on the business, team, and himself, and he made one of the hardest decisions of his life to let his co-founder go. What he told me afterward was really powerful. He wasn't just relieved, he was grateful, especially for all of the time, money, and energy he knew he would stop wasting from now on. And that decision came from understanding what his values truly are. I see situations like this often and how they quietly drain leaders, teams, and businesses. They are weakening foundations and they're creating instability. So if you can't ask employees to define the values of your business, how do you define those values? This is important for you. Remember, companies' values are directly linked to the founder's values. It's not a democratic choice. It's not a branding exercise. As a leader, your values are what you protect, especially when it costs you something. They help you say yes to what matters and no to what doesn't. They filter the noise. They guide trade-offs. They keep you coherent when pressure rises. And that's what's required for your organization and why the company's values need to be linked to your own values. Here's another key point to remember. Your values are shaped by your lived experience. So the work isn't about inventing a perfect list. It's about looking back at the moments that shaped you and recognizing what's already there. For me, growing up, I was constantly told who I should become. The system, parents, teachers, felt so restrictive that I rebelled and I stepped away completely. I even escaped to the other side of the world. And that experience shaped who I am today. Independent, intentional, and deeply focused on owning my identity. Most leaders think they know their values, but they've never articulated them clearly, tested them under pressure, or aligned their decisions around those values. And awareness alone doesn't change behavior, but integration does. Another example, another leader I worked with experienced a real shift after defining her values. Before, she felt unmotivated by her work and lacking a bigger purpose. But once she became clear on her values, everything changed in how she leads, and her entire business changed with her, for the better, of course. By writing down her values, owning them and living them, she started to see how much more she could bring to her client and how her team could start embody those values stronger with their work. And that clarity, as I said, changed everything because her motivation changed too. And she's now even implementing new ways to support her clients better. So how did we achieve that together? Well, let me tell you how, so you can do the same for yourself. You have to look back at the defining moments in your entire life, the turning points, the difficult decisions, and the moments you're really proud of. Those experiences, they're not random, they're where your values come from. This is what shaped your values. So when you start noticing what keeps repeating, what you protect, and what you won't compromise on, then your values become clearer. And once they're clear, the question becomes simple. How do they show up in the way you lead, you decide, and you run your business? And that's when values stop being ideas, something written on the wall, and they start becoming your leadership compass and shaping your future. You know, I don't make these videos just for them to be watched and forgotten. I make them so you can raise your leadership and live in alignment. So don't go to the next video right now. I invite you to reflect on what came up for you during this video and start noticing already any values shaping your decision. And if you'd like to work on this together with structure, with guidance, that's exactly what we do in the aligned integration sessions, where we work monthly on a single topic with a small group of like-minded leaders. The next one is going to be specifically on values, and you'll find the link to register in the description. Most costly decisions don't come from lack of intelligence, experience, or skill. They come from unclear values. And remember this, awareness is not the problem, integration is. And that's when leadership becomes conscious.